So you've seen all the social media posts about teachers talking about classroom management, or maybe you're just feeling a little bit worried or concerned about classroom management. Maybe you had a hard year like I did. I have in the past, and you're wondering how can you go about having really strong classroom management skills for the upcoming school year? Well, today I'm going to be sharing the top 3 classroom management tools I use that help me actually automate my classroom. So, with that being said, let's dive in. So, when it comes to classroom management tools, I remember back in the day, a lot of the things that I considered tools that a lot of teachers use that seemed to work for them were things like blurt beans, clip charts, think sheets, student stores, sticker charts, everything in between. And while these were all great, oftentimes these wouldn't work for me, or they would work for a week and then have the fizzle out of energy to upkeep with them, or my students would become disinterested, or it was just a lot to manage on top of teaching. And I constantly felt like I was putting out fires while trying to maintain the new classroom management tool I was using in the classroom. Well, these tools in particular are things that I've actually used and have been proven to use time and time again, despite however random or however diverse my group of students will be that year. So the first classroom management tool I use in my classroom every single year and has been proven to work are procedures. Now, procedures, I've talked about this very much in depth in past content. So if you want to check those out, highly recommend that you do. But procedures are how you expect your students to react and move throughout the classroom. They can respond or interact. This could be with each other, with resources, getting online. Some examples could be getting online, raising their hand, using the restroom, washing their hands, grabbing resources, talking with a partner, etc. You get the point. All of these things I like to practice during the first couple weeks of school to make sure my students really understand what the expectations are, because the reality is, especially after these last couple of years where I've got to go throughout different teacher classrooms, we all have different expectations and we all have different boundaries and we all teach things differently, which is one of the most beautiful things about teaching. But for our kids, that could be hard what we mean when we see get in line. Get in line is a very vague, what are we supposed to do? Do we use walking feet? Am I allowed to talk? Am I allowed to turn to the person behind me? Am I at a level 0? Am I at a level 1? All these things, when you're super clear about, a majority of the time your students are going to want to follow the expectations. They don't want to be outed in front of their classmates. So being super clear on what your expectations are is where procedures come in. Now, again, I've talked about this in depth, but procedures, how I personally like to teach them is first, I like to introduce what they are, and then I like to model it. I will physically get up and model that procedure. So if I'm modeling raising my hand, I will show them an example where I'm literally sitting down like a student and raising my hand, and we'll then have a discussion on what it looks like and sounds like to follow that procedure. What did it look like? What did it sound like? After that, I will then either myself or another student will model the wrong way to go about doing it. I'll make sure to exaggerate this to the fullest, and then we'll have a discussion on what this procedure shouldn't look like and shouldn't sound like. From there, I will have my students discuss, and we'll discuss why is it important? Why is it important to do it the first way versus the second way? What are we helping others do? Why is it important that we continuously do it the first way? After that, we'll practice as a whole, and we'll continuously practice until my class gets it right, because my goal with my procedures is to create habits so that my students naturally follow the expectations and procedures and they don't have to think about it. This is the main piece of automating my classroom, is when it's naturally a habit to follow the expectations in class, It's a lot easier to automate your classroom. So if you want more help on how I teach procedures, I actually created classroom procedure slides that you can grab that walk you through the entire thing that I just showed you, but I did it for you with over 40 different classroom procedures, common classroom procedures you can use in a classroom. And this is not only for primary students, but all the way to 12th grade students. You can use them for any age. So definitely check that out if you want me to come up with your classroom procedures, and they're editable too, which I like. So if how I teach classroom procedures is different how you do classroom procedures, you can go in and edit the text, and editing is a lot faster than sitting down and creating the slides and having to start from scratch. So I wanted to save you time with that. So that's the first tool I use are my classroom procedure slides. And I like to teach classroom procedures during those first few weeks of school, especially. But then whenever I notice that my students are being disruptive or having a hard time with a particular procedure, I'll pull up that slide and we'll review it throughout the year. So let's say I have students who are a majority of the class forgot what it should look like and sound like to walk in a line. I'll pull up that procedure slide. I'll pull up the line up procedure slide and we'll practice it, and we'll go through the steps again of teaching it, and then we'll practice what it should look like and sound like until we can do it correctly. So that's the first thing I like to do. And I also like to use these classroom procedures as natural consequences. If a student isn't walking in the classroom, we'll pull up the classroom procedure slide to use walking feet and grab materials in the classroom. If a student is making a mess in the bathroom, I'll pull up the classroom procedure slide on what it should look like and sound like to use the restroom the correct way, and they're not consequences. They get to clean it up and practice what it should look like and sound like. So really, procedures are just kind of like the strong foundation to all things classroom management. The second classroom management tool I like to use in my classroom are actually classroom jobs. Here's the thing. I learned after about the second or third year in my teaching career that you can have your students actually help you with a lot of things, and it's even better when they can help keep each other accountable. So I have a student helper who actually helps my students transition without me. I have a student helper who helps their group buddies and leaders and help them during centers. I have a position that's the line leader and somebody who watches the line and reminds students of what the expectations are. All of the things to follow expectations are then put on my students. I'm just there as a referee to make sure that if anything's caught or to an extreme, I can manage it. But once my kids get really good at these classroom procedures and it's a habit, they can help maintain each other and keep each other accountable. And then I can pull them to the side when they're not following the expectations, if that makes sense. So having those jobs and helping students transition from one thing to another has been extremely helpful in the classroom. So classroom jobs are essentially where you just assign a student to a certain activity. Here's how I've used them in the classroom. I talked about this a little bit, but I actually have my teacher helper who's in charge of the transitions. When I have students transition from one thing to another, whether that's from the carpet to whole group learning, from whole group learning to independent, all of those things I have a transition song with. My students go up once they're a teacher helper and they push play on the song. My students naturally know to start transitioning from one activity to another. And by a certain point in the song, they transition to the next thing. And the student just hits pause on that, restarts the song, and then they continue on with their day. So having a student helper run transitions has been super helpful. I've had a line leader who not only leads the line, but they make sure that everyone follows the expectations. That way, when a student isn't following, I have somebody who runs the line to make sure students are following expectations. I also have somebody who's in charge of centers. They walk around or they work and they make sure to check up every once in a while to make sure students are following the procedures and expectations when it comes to centers, and they know what the natural consequence is going to be when students aren't following those expectations. So when I pull students for small group, I don't have to worry about managing that piece. But giving my students jobs that help manage those pieces helps my classroom running to the point where I don't have to do anything. It's mostly student led. So that's the second classroom tool I like to use, are student jobs. And again, make sure to check out my resources, because in the description down below, I do have a resource for classroom jobs and how you can help use them to not only help you keep up with your teacher workload, but to also help manage the classroom as well. The third classroom management tool I use in my classroom is a super improver wall. Now, a backstory, and I apologize if you've heard this many times before, but when I first started teaching, a majority of the teachers that were my mentor teachers and the teachers who were in my first two districts use things called clip charts. If you're not familiar with what they are, you started a color, you either clip up or clip down, depending on your behavior. What ended up being a problem about that is whenever I had a student clip down, they would become completely dysregulated and it'd be a hard time for them to come back to center. So I wanted something that I could use every once in a while to really focus on positive classroom expectations and behavior without pointing out disruptive behavior. So that way I can pull disruptive behavior for a sideline conversation, address it privately, and help them, give them skills to fix and natural consequence to fix their behavior and do better next time. So I ended up finding the Super Improver Wall. Super Improver Wall is essentially where everyone starts off at one level. They get a sticker. When you call them out, you superstar shout them out. And then once they fill up their card, they level up and they go to the next level. And at the end of those levels, eventually when they get to the top level at the end of the year, they get, a party, a celebration, something like that. What I like to do, my personal spin, is instead of giving my students like some monetary reward, what I end up doing is whenever they level up, I will write out a superstar shout out or a glow note, and I'll send it home with their passport so they could show their families about how awesome they've been doing in class and the fact that they leveled up. So that's what I personally like to do. And what's cool about this is it helps me build strong relationships with my families, but it also helps my families know that I'm there to help support the positive. But I've actually had families frame these notes that I've sent home, and my students are super proud and super motivated to get Super Improver Wall stickers. Super fun story. I actually ended up using scratch and sniff stickers for these, and my second graders would stand there and they would scratch and sniff their stickers as they were hung on the wall, which was super cute because you had a bunch of second graders filling the wall. So anyways, I like to do it that way. If you want to figure out which Super Improver Wall I use, make sure to check out the resource down below, and I'll link down to the one that I use in my classroom. That wraps up the 3 classroom management tools I use in my classroom. These are the foundational classroom management tools I've used year after year that helps me automate my classroom. The first thing was procedures. When your students have clear guidelines on what the procedures and expectations are, they then know how they should be acting, and then they create a habit of doing so you don't have to put out fires and redirect disruptive behavior throughout the day as often. And then when you need a natural consequence, oftentimes it's to practice that procedure. Second thing is classroom jobs. I like getting my students involved to help automate the classroom. So that way when I have an observation and I'm working with a small group, I don't have to worry about my students in centers. I can just continue to do my thing and know that I have multiple layers of students helping each other to help keep the climate and the environment positive in the classroom while I'm working one-on-one or in a small group setting with my students. Third thing, Super Improver Wall. I love using positive affirmations, positive redirection, and to send positive notes home when my students are following the expectations, and that's where this comes in. Instead of using things like parties or rewards, clip charts and everything in between, this is what I like to use instead. So with all that being said, if you want to dive deeper into classroom management, make sure to check out the free Ultimate Classroom Management Guide. I linked to 10 answers to 10 questions I got asked about classroom management. Plus, I linked to additional YouTube videos and podcast episodes for you to check out. The second thing I want to invite you to check out is a classroom management bundle. A lot of the things I mention in this content or in this week's content is included in the bundle at a discounted price. So if you want to start using all the tools I mentioned, make sure to check that classroom management bundle out. The third and final thing, if you want to learn more about how I go about managing my classroom, not only the tools I use, but how I go about using them, I highly recommend you check out the Ultimate Classroom Management 15-Day Challenge. So this is a 15-day challenge where each day I release a different prompt that walks you through one piece to creating your classroom management plan and what I use in the classroom to automate my classroom when it comes to classroom management. Plus, here's the thing, you don't have to do things exactly how I do. That's why with this challenge, I try really hard to give you prompts at the end to take what I do and make it your own. So make sure to check that out. All right. If you found this week's content helpful, make sure to send me a DM and make sure to like and subscribe. That way we can reach more teachers who need content like this. As always, remember, we are stronger together, and I will see you in the next one, Teacher Bestie. Bye.